Welcome to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm your host, Brooke Grimsley. This week, we talked to Katie Woo of The Athletic as the Cardinals get ready for a big offseason as they look to turn things around in 2024. Thank you so much for joining us, Katie. First off, how's the weather in Arizona? Because it's actually kind of similar here in St. Louis, which is weird for November, but I know it's always nice and warm down there.
Yes, Brooke, super sunny. It feels like the middle of summer. Unfortunately, it is November, so I like to live in delusion here, but beautiful times as always in Scottsdale.
Well, Katie, the GM meeting starting off with a bang with Cardinals president of baseball operations John Mozeliak's comments really getting fans kind of in a little bit of a tizzy after he mentioned that the payroll will be similar to how it was last year before the trade deadline. How do we decipher that message?
Sure, Brooke. Well, let's start with the obvious. Payroll can be a very confusing and fluid method, especially this year for the Cardinals and for a lot of teams as they face uncertainty about revenue sharing. That is beside the point. When we look at the numbers right now in payroll projections, which I will say and reiterate multiple times are projections and will change, the Cardinals are looking to add about $40 million to payroll that would get them to $200 million, which would be the highest payroll in the team's history. Now, they're on track. The projections are that they will reach that by adding roughly 40 million in payroll. They have about 100 or 50 to 55 million to actually spend to get to that 200 million mark. Again, these numbers are going to fluctuate. But when we look at payroll specific to last year, when the Cardinals entered spring training in 2023, they had a payroll around 160, 165 million dollars. They were on track to break that 200 million threshold by the trade deadline if they added instead of subtracting. As we know, the Cardinals sold at the trade deadline. They offloaded a bunch of expiring contracts, so that brought their team payroll down. So when you're looking at what the Cardinals are saying when they're saying our payroll could mirror what it was looking like last year, you're looking at the $40 million that they thought they were going to have to spend in 2023, along with the other $15 million that they have by offloading those free agent contracts. So that's kind of where I think the confusion of spending and payroll starts, is these are complex figures. Again, we don't know the exact estimates or the exact amounts of this payroll. I don't know, querels is what they would say. So it's really difficult to predict the payroll methods and what they could look like. So budgeting means, in this case, how can we allocate our resources wisely enough so that we can boost the rotation and the bullpen, but do so in a way where it's not just one or two additions, because one or two additions is not going to make or break the trajectory of the Cardinals last season. They need multiple additions, and that's the tough part in trying to predict what this market will look like, because they have to do it with so many different arms.
And that's the key word that you said there, is that they're not only going to address the starting pitching, but the bullpen is something that they have to address as well. A key word that I thought that Mozeliak mentioned is volume when it comes to pitching. So when you're looking at how they are going to allocate this money, I'm sure that getting a starting pitcher is a priority, but how did they kind of handle the budget with addressing the starting pitching, but also the bullpen?
Well, we heard this multiple times in the second half, right, Brooke? The Cardinals need pitching, and more pitching. Mo went out at the trade deadline and said, we're looking to add 3 starters. That was always going to be a tough task for the Cardinals, just based on where they are in terms of spending, their spending history, and of course, the demand from 29 other organizations to find pitching as well. Now, they're still going to look to add several arms, but might not be 3 traditional starting pitchers. It could be 2 starters and a swingman. It could be a higher end starting pitcher and 2 lower middle rotation arms. It could be a high leverage bullpen arm. It could be a guy that does multiple things, more of a versatile role. And they just don't know yet. And their Cardinals are going to come out and say different things and different strategies. And the next week, it might be something completely different than what they said the previous week. That's normal for this time. It does not mean the organization has no idea what they're doing. They have several avenues they want to pursue. And when you are a team that has such a tough ask in front of them in terms of really fixing the pitching in one off season, you want the Cardinals to be as open to as many ideas as possible. The worst thing this organization can do in the second week of November, right now, with 2 to 3 months left in the offseason, is identify one way and stick to it regardless of how other things are changing. I know fans want a definitive answer. What are the Cardinals going to do? Who are they going to sign? Are they going to be good next year? All valid questions, and I think the Cardinals are certainly understanding and wanting to find that answer for themselves too. but it's really difficult for the organization, not just St. Louis, but across the board, to identify their one avenue and route and stick with it. I think the Cardinals need to be as open to everything as they possibly could be.
We're not done talking to Katie. Coming up next here on Fox 2, we're going to discuss with her about the possible pitchers that could come here to St. Louis, and we're going to talk about what's happening with Yadier Molina and if he's going to return here to St. Louis. That's next on the 101 on Sports. Welcome back to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm your host, Brooke Grimsley. We go back to our discussion now with Katie Woo of The Athletic as we look at which pitchers the Cardinals could land this offseason, and we talk about the potential return of Yadier Molina. Based off your conversations and what you're hearing, are the Cardinals still in the hunt, in the bidding amongst those with Yamamoto and even another big name like Aaron Nola? What are you hearing about that?
I think they're certainly going to check in on them. I mean, they're going to do their due diligence. Obviously, Yamamoto is probably arguably the best free agent pitcher available. Aaron Nola, a close second. But I have a hard time thinking the Cardinals are going to outbid any of the major market teams for one, what we just talked about in terms of having to allocate so many resources to so many different avenues, but also they've never outbid or historically spent in a way that would require them to do so. I'm not saying it's a 0% chance, but I am saying I certainly understand fan skepticism in saying the team and the organization has never done a signing of this magnitude before. Why should we believe this is anything different? I know we say in Missouri it's the show me state, and that mentality certainly applies here. They'll check in on Nola, they'll check in on Yamamoto, they'll probably do a little bit more than that. But in terms of if they're going to sign either one of those players, that would just require so much spending. I'm not sure what that would leave to allocate to the other avenues of the club they need to address.
And with Sonny Gray, it seems like though that's another person that they're very interested in. Do you see him being a fit for the Cardinals, and how are those pursuits going?
I do think Sonny Gray would be a good fit for the Cardinals. And I mean, he's a top 3 American League Cy Young Award vote getter. Those finalists were announced earlier in the week. He had a tremendous campaign for the Twins. He's 34 years old, so he's not going to require a long-term contract, but he's still going to be, I think, a game changer for any club that signs him. Is Sonny Gray, just that one signing, going to move the needle for the Cardinals? Probably not. But Sonny Gray, paired with a couple of other high leverage arms and maybe another swingman, a bulk guy, you're suddenly feeling a lot better about that rotation, knowing that you have Gray, who I think could be really solid number 2 in that rotation. Now, I understand fans' gripes. Maybe if the Cardinals only get Sonny Gray, would that be a disappointing offseason? I do think so. I don't think that has anything to do with Sonny himself. I think Sonny would be a tremendous addition to this Cardinal staff. But this is what happens when you have, to use Mozeliak's words, volume to add. It can't just be Sonny Gray and nobody else.
That leads into my next question because, okay, say theoretically the Cardinals do go out and get Sonny Gray. Could they make a big trade here to get that other starting pitcher? Do you see that being a likely avenue that they take?
I see everything as an avenue they could take, but certainly the trade market, because they have such depth, especially in their outfield. When you look at a bunch of these young, controllable guys, Alec Burleson, Lucan Baker, Juan Yepes, Moises Gomez, these are all controllable talent that identifying teams are going to look at and say, this could benefit our club in the future. Are those guys enough to swing a pack or to swing a trade for a top tier starting pitcher? Probably not. You're probably going to have to add a proven major leaguer or two. Think Tommy Edman, Brennan Donovan, Nolan Gorman, all players that Cardinals probably don't want to trade. And you can certainly make the argument for if they stay or if they should be traded. But the Cardinals have the depth to swing that. One thing that is pointing in the Cardinals' favor, the free agency market for position playing, specifically offensive players, is very thin. And the Cardinals have bulks of that, especially young, controllable talent, like I mentioned. I do think they'll be in high demand there if they want to swing a trade. However, when you look at the Cardinals' core of the club, that's a core that they believe in for the near future. So now the front office is tasked with who do we potentially get rid of from this core that we already believe is instrumental and going to be instrumental in our success going forward. And can they swing the right trade for the right player? Of course, that's like the $1 million question, Brooke.
In your personal opinion, of course, they could get in a fork in a road here when it comes to making these decisions with the starting pitcher, especially when we're talking about via trade here. What do you think? If you were in the Cardinals position, if you're in the GM's shoes and you have to get rid of one of these young position players, we know that we've seen the Cardinals be snake bitten in the past. And I know that a lot of people are thinking about that. Like, okay, well, if you give up a Nolan Gorman, is he going to turn into another star like Randy Rosarina, where we're going to have to talk about him elsewhere or whatever he could be? If you're the Cardinals in that position, what do you do, especially if you're saying that you're going to have a quick turnaround in 2024 when it comes to a trade?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question and one that I'm not jealous of the front office and having to figure out. We talked about how we can make cases for each player to stay with the organization or be traded. Let's look at Nolan Gorman because he's fascinating to me. He's a young 23-year-old that can hit 30 home runs from the left side. He's a homegrown talent. It's been a while since the Cardinals have developed a left-handed power hitter. Certainly had a great breakout sophomore season this year. Not a lot to be excited about for Cardinals fans, but I did think overall Nolan Gorman had a great year. That's enough where you can look at him and say, okay, this is someone that we can build our offense around going forward. There's also the back issues. When you're 23 years old and you've had a series of back issues, it kind of makes you think, okay, hey, what's going on here? Back issues usually don't get better as you age. However, at this time, it doesn't seem like the Cardinals or Gorman are too overly concerned with that. Other teams who aren't familiar with Gorman's medical, they might be. Where would Gorman play? He can play third base, but as we know, that's locked up by Nolan Arenado. He can play second base, but the Cardinals have Brendan Donovan and or Tommy Edman if he's not playing center field. And Gorman, in my opinion, is an offensive first player, but let's not diminish the strides he made defensively over the last year. I do think he's a much better second baseman. So all those things are going to be valuable to teams. All the reasons the Cardinals value him is why other teams will as well. It's also why the Cardinals wouldn't necessarily want to get rid of him. So if you hang on to Gorman, okay, who else is tradable? Brendan Donovan, a super utility player that can play everywhere, that maybe doesn't have the power of Gorman, but has different attributes that benefit the club. What about Tommy Edman? He could be your center fielder next year, or he could be traded. And these are all intertwined, and it's so difficult to predict exactly what would happen because none of the markets for any of these players outside of pitching have been set. So I think it's kind of why you're not seeing a lot of definitive answers from the Cardinals right now. It's because it's just too early to really figure out what a viable strategy would be, whether it's free agency, whether it's trades, or whether it's internally.
Well, Katie, another big question this offseason is whether or not Yadier Molina is going to return to the Cardinals in some sort of capacity, whether that's a coaching role in the dugout or even as an advisor. I know that Mozeliak said that he's hopeful that he will be a part of the team next year. That's not exactly a yes or no. So what are you hearing about his possible return?
Yeah, both sides have been in conversation. And how exciting is that if you're a Cardinals fan to think that Yadi could be coming back to Busch Stadium just in a different capacity? Right now, the Cardinals aren't looking to have any subtractions in their coaching staff. Now, that could change again. They are looking to add to it. We mentioned this in The Athletic and on 101 ESPN early towards the end of the season on how the Cardinals could benefit from bolstering their coaching staff because they had one of the smaller major league coaching staffs in baseball. So by adding to the staff and helping out, I do think there's a multitude of positions that Yadi could do in St. Louis. I do think that if he joins the coaching staff, it would be an everyday, day-to-day role, maybe overseeing some of the pitching, helping Wilson Contreras, of course, being a staple of leadership in that clubhouse, just in a different way. Whatever it is, I think the Cardinals and Yadi are going to do as much as they can to reunite. It certainly sounds promising, but again, Brooke, nothing official yet.
What role do you think he would be best serving the Cardinals?
That's a good question because if the Cardinals aren't planning to lose anyone, there's not a lot of open positions, so they would have to create one. I can see Yachty doing the duties of in-game strategy that a bench coach does. I think if you're looking at how to read swings, how to read pitchers, how to read the defense, there's arguably nobody better in the Cardinals organization that's done that over the last 2 decades than Yachty or Molina. Now, of course, the Cardinals have a bench coach in Joe McEwing. There's a lot that goes on into being a bench coach. You're working basically a 15-hour day. Maybe they split duties. Maybe Yachty is more of a roaming instructor. Sometimes he's with the pitchers. Sometimes, again, he's with Wilson Contreras, Andrew Knizner, Ivan Herrera. And sometimes he's with the hitters. Who knows? I do think the Cardinals are going, again, to do anything they can to add him to his staff. But I think the kind of overall duties of a bench coach, without maybe necessarily giving him that title, would be best suited for everybody.
And it seems like he's made it pretty clear that he wants to join in some sort of capacity. So do you think that that's just the biggest holdup is figuring out what that time commitment would look like and what he feels comfortable with in that role?
Absolutely. I think when the Cardinals are looking to add a bunch of different positions, these are new positions for the organization. So they're still trying to figure out their responsibilities. I don't think it's a matter of wanting to or not. I think both parties are very interested in making this happen. It's just a matter of creating a position that allows for the best fit for both sides.
Are you surprised, especially after a 91 loss season, talking about the coaching staff here? Are you surprised that there isn't more of a turnover with the coaching staff, considering? I mean, it's a historically bad season for the Cardinals, and you see that happen not just in baseball, but with other sports in general. When things tend to go bad, then they look towards the coaching staff and maybe bring in some new, fresh voices. Are you surprised that there wasn't any turnover with the coaching staff?
That's a great question. Yes and no. I think because this is a performance-based industry, results matter here. Clearly, the Cardinals did not have the desired results that they wanted in last season. That usually there is some sort of action to that. Usually, teams look to go in a different direction. But it was pretty clear to me halfway through the season that the coaching staff had not lost the support of the clubhouse. Actually, it seemed like they were defending the coaches more than anything. And to me, that was a big sign that, okay, it's not about the preparation. It's not about the game plan. It's about the execution. And at the end of the day, you can't have Turner Ward go out and hit for these guys. You can't have Dusty Blake go out there and execute the pitches that you want. I do think adding to the staff will help. I think it's a good way to split up the jarring amount of responsibilities that come with being a major league coach. But I wasn't necessarily surprised that changes weren't made in terms of losing jobs. I do agree with the premise of needing to add more to the coaching staff and maybe split up responsibilities a little bit differently going forward.
We have much more coming up with Katie Woo. Coming up next here on Fox 2, we're going to discuss about the possibility about an outside voice coming into the Cardinals organization. That's next on the 101 on Sports. Welcome back to the 101 on Sports here on Fox 2. I'm your host, Brooke Grimsley. We go back to our discussion now with Katie Woo of The Athletic as we look at the potential of an outside voice coming into the Cardinals organization, and we see what the Cardinals' biggest rival, the Cubs, did this offseason with a new change in manager. And it looks like there might be possibly a new voice coming into the organization, an outside voice, which we know is very rare for the Cardinals. There's reports that former Red Sox executive Chaim Bloom could possibly come in and be some sort of advisor for the Cardinals. I know that John Mozeliak, until it's a done deal, can't go out and confirm it, but he did seem pretty receptive to the idea of having an outside perspective come into the organization and see how they can improve, right?
I would think so. I mean, when you look at the Cardinals, they're such an insular organization, and over the last 15 years, they've been largely successful. So you can argue whether or not that's a bad thing. But an outside perspective after historically bad years, certainly the worst year in Mozeliak's tenure, I think would be helpful. The Cardinals are a loyal organization. They are always promoting within. We see that, of course, through the coaching staff and through the front office. And I think that pays dividends in terms of creating trust and loyalty within the organization. But sometimes you can get so caught up in the way things have been doing that you're missing out on other trends or other avenues that could make you better. And having an outside opinion, someone who's coming in and seeing things from a different angle, can only help. I think this is the year the Cardinals really need to get strategic. They cannot afford to have another season like 2023. It was embarrassing. It shocked them. They didn't really have a response because they'd never lost in that pedigree before, in that fashion before. They certainly know they can't do it again. And I think that it's a good sign that they're looking at all possible ways to boost themselves internally, even if that means adding someone from the outside to kind of change perspectives around here.
Do you see Bloom being an advisor, especially with helping build back things up on the pitching side for the Cardinals?
You know, I'm not quite sure the Cardinals have figured out what they would need in that regard. I think they have a solid job in their assistant GMs and Moises Rodriguez and Randy Flores, who've been hard at work in this general managers meetings. Same with general manager Mike Gersh. But when you're looking at what they could be doing in terms of adding externally, I don't think they've identified what potential role that could be. I think it's more of a just overseeing the organization as a whole.
Outside of the Cardinals, Katie, another big shakeup within the Central Division with Craig Counsell going from the Brewers to the Cubs. What does this mean for the rest of the division?
It was shocking. When the reports were floating in, and you see a report that Counsell is going to a team where there's a current manager. I know about 16, 17 reporters that freaked out in the moment, including myself. And then about 5 minutes later, it comes out that it's the Cubs, and I feel like it hit really close to home for Cardinals fans because even though it's just a manager change, because it was so unexpected, I do feel like it majorly shook up the division. For one, to me, it looked like the Brewers are heading in a different direction. They've been top of the division for more or less the last 5 years. The Cubs are looking to be on the upside of their rebuild. It wasn't a total rebuild, but they certainly, regressed a couple of years and started building up this year. And the Cardinals, again, find themselves in a really difficult spot and trying to capitalize on a division that's changing. I mean, the Pirates have a lot of young talent. The Reds are on the cusp of, I think, of being a serious breakout team. The Cubs look like they could be doing that as well. For the Cubs to make such a dramatic move and replace David Ross, who they claim to be their guy at the end of the season, and bring in Counsell because he is regarded as one of, if not the top manager minds in the game, I think that was a pretty clear message to Cubs fans and maybe Cardinals fans too, that Chicago is trying to win next year. So maybe Cardinals Cubs, that rivalry gets a little bit stronger if that's even possible this year. But to me, it seems like the Cubs this is their early statement of saying, we're going to be a serious team. And hopefully the rest of the division, especially and for the Cardinals' sake, can respond accordingly.
And last question for you, because it seems like everybody has different expectations of what would be a successful offseason. From the fans' perspective, what do you think they would consider to be a successful offseason? And from the Cardinals' perspective, what do you think they would consider to be a successful offseason?
I don't think what those two consider match up at all. And that's fair for both sides. I think as a fan, you have the right to think what you want, and an organization has to, deal with a lot of parameters. Personally, I would like to do a happy medium. I think Cardinals fans would consider a successful offseason Yamamoto 1, Nola 2, Gray 3, right? But wouldn't we all?
Yes.
I think the Cardinals would consider it a successful offseason if they have 3 to 4 durable quality pitchers that they can depend on. Personally, I think if the Cardinals get one of the top free agent arms, maybe top 5, a solid middle rotation upgrade, and a decent swingman, and they add a high leverage relief arm in the bullpen, I think that's a successful offseason. But really, Brooke, what will tell us if it's successful or not will be the Cardinals' record in October.
That is the big indicator. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for joining us. And also, I hope you get enough rest, too, down there in Arizona, at least some time for yourself, too.
Thanks, Brooke. I appreciate it. I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Thank you to Katie Woo for joining us. And you can check out her work on theathletic.com, where you can see all the updates about the Cardinals and their offseason. Thank you for joining us this Sunday for another episode of the One-on-One on Sports, and we'll see you next week here on Fox 2.